Hello everybody, welcome to the Monster Hunter Wilds review. And yes, I am well aware it is quite some time after launch, but I wanted to let this one kind of marinate out there and sit with everyone to see how it landed and let the honeymoon phase pass, so to speak. But before we get into the review, let's get some context of where I am as a Monster Hunter fan. My history of Monster Hunter kind of starts with the PSP version on Freedom Unite. That game was a lot of fun. I got it for free on PlayStation Plus when they really started doing that, and I was like, dang, this is awesome. And I didn't finish it because I have commitment issues apparently. But World came out and ignited that fire. I went back, I got Generations Ultimate for Switch, enjoyed the hell out of that. I love both the old style and the new style of the games. They're all great in their own way. For me personally, Monster Hunter World and Generations Ultimate stand as the pinnacle to Monster Hunter games. Rise is a lot of fun, but there's a lot about Rise that I thought kind of betrayed the identity of Monster Hunter in some ways, especially in the treatment of monsters as more chess pieces and action figures rather than having them feel like an insurmountable wall of just muscle that you are there to just butt heads with. And it did detract from the experience a little bit, as well as some other things here and there. World, however, had everything super grounded and pretty much the way I think a lot of people imagine a next generation of Monster Hunter should feel. And I also don't have a problem saying for the community, I'm pretty sure most people agree that the move sets for the weapons in World are about how you imagine all the move sets should be. Now, even Base World kind of lacked in monster variety a little bit and made up for it with Iceborne. All of this is important context for Wilds. And we'll go more in depth with these things, but I think this will help you guys see a very clear picture of where I'm coming from with my review. So let's get into it. The pros. What did I like the most about this? The combat. It feels better than it ever has, and that might be a hot take. I don't know, but I know this game feels wonderful to play. Every weapon has a certain heft to it, and the quality of life improvements to all in between World Rise and now Wilds has this feeling like its final form in a way. And its new focus mode is really a game-changing addition that works in tandem very well with the new wounds system that is on the monsters that really replaces World's clutch claw mechanic that people were kind of mixed on having to use. Here with this new wound system, there is no disturbance to player combat flow when attacking the monster, as you just attacking the same part of a monster will yield that wound that can be exploited with new moves that prioritize destroying it and doing a ton of damage. At the same time, destroying these wounds gives many materials and can often leave the monsters stunned over and over. The pace of combat and combat encounters also feels much faster without being actually much faster overall, at least for me in comparison to how fast on average I think I went through fights on World. This helped it feel like the classic Monster Hunter gameplay loop, but for kind of a more modern day, in all the best ways. This is helped by the classic Monster Hunter gameplay loop of hunt monster, make weapons and armor to fight stronger monsters, make weapons and armor from those monsters, and then continue. In this sense, Monster Hunter Wilds could be the most addictive yet, as the system is pretty tried and true now, and has been tuned to perfection over the years. This new feeling also extends to the new open area quest design, where you can basically start a quest from anywhere or just choosing monsters on the map, since apparently these hunters have GPS. But this does eliminate a lot of the back and forth feeling you really get from previous titles. I can never go back to the old system after this. I will, but it's going to be a struggle. But even the best combat loop wouldn't matter if the monsters weren't a lot of fun to fight. By and large, the monsters here are either really cool or really weird in their design, but both have very intricate characteristics, more than they ever have before. Sometimes even hunting in packs, which brings another element of realism to them. Some even utilize different environments they're in to attack you or try to gain respite for a short time, and others will call in packs of allies to help them in a fight. So you better be prepared for damn near any situation. This extends to the all new weather systems that are really cool also. These sometimes signal that a big threat has appeared, or vice versa. You just know that when there's a storm, with that storm comes big monsters. Another thing it affects is endemic life, which is another thing that returns from Monster Hunter World in that way specifically, because in Rise there was some endemic life that you could collect, but it was definitely not in the same way as World, which kind of felt like it had its own living ecosystem. This more follows World's way of doing things, where you can find many different creatures all over the place, from big to small, and there's a lot of them to find, and some of them are completely dependent on the weather. Things like, is it windy? Is it sunny? Is it rainy? Is it storming? Is the moon full? Is it a crescent moon? Like, these things matter to a shocking degree, even for collecting plant life. The attention to detail in the environment is honestly second to none almost. It's kind of crazy. Now, when you're out hunting for all this endemic life, what you need by your side? A trusty weapon. And Monster Hunter Wilds has plenty of weapons. And there may not be as many options as World, but here in Wilds, weapons now have perks just like your armor. This brings in completely different build crafting ideas and almost different identities for each weapon. And this, I think, fundamentally is a really fun reason of why build crafting is a lot of fun in this game, but also a little more limiting than it used to be, as these weapons do fulfill specific roles. But overall, I do think it's a net positive with more options being out there. The next thing we should talk about, which makes Wilds wildly different from the rest of the pack, yep, I thought about that just now, you're welcome, is of course the story. Story is actually pretty good. Even though it's not why we are here, I've seen most people land at a kind of meh with it, I think. But I believe it's better than people think. However, I do think it was real low on everyone's priority list when they're wanting to get to the monster slaying part of the game, which I can respect and understand. But for me, I like hearing how things affect the ecosystems. I like hearing about the monsters. I like hearing the ins and outs of the things. And in this one, I actually kind of enjoyed the characters, which is crazy because it seems like most people didn't like the majority of them, especially the kid. Maybe I'm in the minority in this, I don't know. All I know is I enjoyed the kid's story arc and how him and his people are involved with Arkveld, which isn't much of a spoiler as it's shown in the first couple minutes of the game. But his story does ultimately have a pretty cool payoff, and I think it was a really cool departure, and I hope they do continue to try and do these more intricate stories in the future because I think this was a big success. Let's get to some things I kinda got mixed on before we get to them cons. The Sacred. Now, this is your mount in the game, and I do think it's a really cool addition. But I also feel like its inclusion kind of necessitated making these areas much bigger than they needed to be, kind of making them big for the sake of making them big. And in this case, you won't ever be on foot. And that seems like a weird gripe, but like the moment you're not in a hunt, you're on your sacred, which you can drive your sacred, but it's most of the time set to auto move. It'll just move for you. And this kind of takes away a lot of the adventure part of the game. So I do recommend turning the auto run off by default. That way you can just kind of tap up to kind of auto run if you get lost in some ways. But all in all, it is a real mixed bag because it's convenient. It's really cool. It kind of seems like the next evolution of the Palamute from Rise. But I do think it kind of takes away a little bit when you use your sacred 75% of the time outside of combat and you're hardly ever on foot because it's so wildly inefficient to try and walk anywhere on foot with these areas and how big they are. But at least you'll have someone to talk to because another mixed thing I landed on was your cat, because now your cat speaks English. It talks to you, and that's kind of weird. Like, obviously, English for me, but whatever language you choose. But your cat actually speaks to you now. And that's kind of disturbing in a way for me. I'm just used to this rare, feline language all the time. Having actual call outs from my feline friend was so weird for so long. I eventually got used to it though, and it's way more useful to be able to just react to hearing your cat say something and to have to look down at some subtitles to figure out what he's saying in the middle of a fight. So I totally get it, but it's a little weird if you've played Monster Hunter for a long time. Now, that brings me to the cons, because the cons are what has been removed. The actual visual fidelity of the game is not great. The majority of the textures in the game are super low resolution and can be quite a big distraction, especially when talking to people in cutscenes. They appear really flat and super pixelated in a way that feels kind of generations behind, like something on the PS3. And usually, this isn't really a big deal, and because Monster Hunter has really never been defined by its graphics, but it has been with its art design. And here, with how low quality the assets in the game can tend to be, even on the high setting, it leaves kind of a lot to be desired and takes away from a lot of the art style at times. So I can't recommend really dropping it below high to medium because it really affects visual quality a lot, which means that, this is going to be really hard to run for most people. And that's kind of a shame. This also makes no sense when you take a look at the performance in this game. I cannot for the life of me figure out what in this game necessitates being so hard to run on higher end hardware. I play on a PC with RTX 4070, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and an i9 12900K, and I can only average around 45 to 55 frames per second in most areas when things got going, or when in town it would drop even further into the 30s. And as the game progresses, it only gets worse because some of the later areas are harder to run. So you'll likely end up fiddling with the settings a lot more than you would like to throughout if you're on PC. When you start this game up, one of the first things that you will see is a prompt basically warning you that you should be using frame generation. Not only is this a huge red flag, as it indicates a strong crutch on frame gen to run at an acceptable frame rate, but even worse in this case were the visual artifacts that plagued my game when I tried using NVIDIA's DLAA with frame generation, which most of the way through my playthrough, I realized way too late, don't exist when you use quality mode instead of DLAA. Weird. So no using the native version of DLSS to kind of clean things up with the image quality. Using the quality mode offers a much better experience, even if it's a little less crisp. But funny enough, it can actually be improved upon by using the NVIDIA app. With this, you can go and change the DLSS model to the latest version, which does improve image quality. After this, I can actually go down to balanced, which even at 1440p looked pretty good by comparison to quality mode, which gave me a little more headroom also. It looked surprisingly good. This is what I ended up playing on, and it made for a much smoother experience. Now that we've got the big performance elephant out of the room and addressed, let's talk more about the content in the game and what's to come. There's a lot missing here that I feel are kind of staples of Monster Hunter, and they didn't really deserve to be cut. At this time, there is no canteen where you'd normally be able to have a meal with your palico. There is no player housing, taking away a lot of player customization and freedom of expression. And honestly, that was another big reason why collecting Endemic Life in World was so much fun, was because of your housing and your ability to decorate it with the Endemic Life that you've caught. Now, all that is weird, but this next one really gets me. There's no gathering hub. What gives? The gathering hub is the place to hang out in your Monster Hunter multiplayer sessions. Now, our multiplayer session is just in these different base camps wherever we are in Wilds, which, isn't bad, but we're not connected with our buddies in the same way. In World, you could just chill in these areas and just exist with your homies and do different little things. And that was just a big part of World, and I think that's really missing here. And as it might seem unfair to kind of always come back to World in comparison to a lot of these things, I think that's actually a fair comparison because this is supposed to be the sequel to World and supposed to be improving on all the things that World has done. But in reality, it's missing quite a bit. The absence of the Gathering Hub also leaves the multiplayer in its most overly complicated form yet, giving From Software a run for their money in the how complicated can we make this matchmaking metagame. But thankfully, when you get it going, it works. Lastly, I gotta chime in on the difficulty, because there's been a lot of conversation about this. Now, full disclosure, my experience may be a bit different than other players, as I am experienced in Monster Hunter as a franchise, both old and new at this point, and have 2,000 plus hours in Monster Hunter World. But that being said, I do feel like Monster Hunter Wilds is one of the easiest Monster Hunter titles, second only to Monster Hunter Rise. Whether that's because the actual monsters are easier or maybe you're too powerful remains to be seen, but I have a feeling it's just due to the freedom of choice. It's just like Elden Ring, for example, where Elden Ring is the easiest of all the Souls games, but only because you have options. But honestly, it being easier isn't inherently a bad thing, Monster Hunter World was infamous for having a lot of people bounce off of it around fighting Anjaneth, as he was the first kind of skill check and it was only about 10% through the game. Capcom are probably actively trying to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, so it's a little more forgivable. But I expect in the future they're gonna let us have it after all of this talk about it, the game being too easy. Mark my words, folks. Come back next year when that DLC drops. It's gonna be kicking our asses. So those are my thoughts on Wilds. This was a big one. I hope y'all made it and enjoyed yourselves. It's been a blast making this one, but I hope you have had just as good a time as I have making it. Until then, like the video, subscribe to hear more from me right when a new video drops. I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.